Hey everybody, Code Foster here. I want to talk to you just a little bit about using HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript for creating Windows Store apps. You can do all this in Visual Studio. We're going to be looking at this right now in the form of some slides to just kind of walk you through an overview, and then I'm going to show you just a little bit of an example, getting started with app development using HTML5. So first of all, Visual Studio gives you some project templates that you can work with. These are much like the project templates that you'll find in other language stacks, like the C# and XAML language stack, but there are a few differences, and let me give you a brief introduction to each of these templates and when you might want to start with that template. So if you do a File New Project, you're going to see a list of these templates, and the blank one is just going to be a black screen. You're going to start with the blank one if you know your way around this kind of development. You know where you want to start. You want to write it all from scratch. Or if you're going to be making something pretty simple, like maybe you're going to be working on a native game and you're just going to drop a canvas on the page and write all your game code to show up inside that canvas, blank app would be a good candidate. The next one is the grid. The grid is the classic Windows 8 tiles application. It actually implements the three-tier navigation approach. So you get the hub, you get the sections, and you get the detail level. If you want to know more about that, you can find out at design.windows.com. But that three-tier navigation that's real typical of Windows 8 applications is already implemented in the grid template. So you not only get those typical tiles, you also get all that navigation already built in. The entire application uses sample data that's in the data.js file in the project, and so you can go customize it to your heart's content or replace those local data elements with web service calls that are actually pulling data down from the web. So much appreciated there. The next template I want to talk about is the split. The split is good for things like the email app that they show a vertically scrolling list of items on the left, and clicking on one will show you the details of that item on the right. Now, vertically scrolling in Windows is a very rare occurrence. So a split app is pretty easy to spot because it's got that vertical scroll bar on the left. I don't use the split one very often, don't like it so much, but that's personal preference. The next one is fixed. Fixed is good at scaling content to maintain its aspect ratio on various screen sizes. So for something like, imagine you had a checkers game and you don't want all of the checkers squares to be tweaked. You want the aspect ratio to stay fixed. You could use the fixed layout. Now the last one is my favorite, the navigation template. The navigation template is quite blank. There's not very much to it, but it does implement the Win.js navigation. Win.js is the library in HTML JavaScript apps that make a lot of things a lot easier for us. And in Win.js, a navigation framework has been developed that allows for a single page architecture in our Windows Store apps. So that can be very helpful, and the navigation app is almost always the app that I start with. Now, when you create a project, you're going to notice that the structure looks a lot like a website. You've got a default.html file, and then you've got some JS and some CSS and some image assets. And if you double click on the package appx manifest file, that's an important file in Windows Store apps. It's a collection of metadata about your app. If you look in there, you'll see that that's where the app is being determined to start at the default.html page. So if you had multiple HTML files at the root level of your app there, you could specify which one of those is the one that it should start with. Almost always you'll leave it the way it is at default.html. You can also see in the top right that we've got a folder called Pages with a subfolder called Home that has HTML and CSS and JavaScript in it. And we can deduce that this app has been created from the navigation template because of the presence of that Pages folder. So let's go ahead and look at this default.html file. When we look at the default.html, we see what is 100% HTML5 standard compliant code. Okay, there's nothing proprietary about this code. Even though it's creating a Windows app, it's still completely standards-based code. The only thing that looks like it might be proprietary, though it's not, is lines 8 through 10. What we're actually doing there is we're referencing a standard CSS, JS, and another JS file, but we're referencing those with a package reference, which is looking at another package that's built into this project. Okay, so you can include other packages of other SDKs, for instance, and then you can point to those packages with a package reference and reference the CSS and JS and other resources that are within them. Now, in this default.html, because this was created for the navigation template, and the navigation template is implementing this single page architecture, we don't have content here in the body of the default.html. Instead, we have a control called the content host. Okay. Now, this is the way that you designate a control in an HTML app. It's pretty elegant, in my opinion. What you're basically doing is you're using a standard div element, giving it an ID. Yeah, that's not critical, but the critical thing is that you add these two attributes, data-win-control and options. So the data dash, in case you don't know, is just a way of saying this is a valid HTML5 attribute. Anything that begins with data dash is a valid HTML5 attribute. So the encoding environment's not going to scream at you, and any code validators are not going to determine that this is an invalid attribute, even though it's a custom one. So it's a custom attribute. It's a Windows-specific custom attribute. So we have data-win-control and options. Now the control is the fully qualified object name of an object that's written in our JavaScript that is going to be instantiated into this div. It's going to land right here in this div. So the framework, the JavaScript, is actually going to turn this div into something richer, something more full. And we have the opportunity to pass in some options. So we're passing in what you can notice that it has curly braces around it. And what we're really passing in here is just a JavaScript object. This is using JavaScript object initializer syntax, and we can pass in an object with various properties. And in this case, we're passing in the home property and specifying that although the user is landing at default.html, we want to make it appear that they're on the home page. So the first page I want to browse to is home.html. Now let's take a look at this home.html. So this is the page that we're browsing to. And you can see that it still has an HTML tag and a head and a body. It's a complete HTML file. However, the framework is actually going to look for the div that has a class of fragment. In this case, you can see that on line 18. And the contents of that fragment, once it's been rendered into its resulting HTML, the contents there are going to be injected into that content host on the default.html. So that's pretty slick. We've got some HTML that we can write in the form of a page here, and this HTML is going to be rendered out with its styling from the CSS file and all of its logic from the JS file, and the result is then going to appear to the user in the context of that default.html. The fact that we are using single page architecture is much better for the developer because it means that you're always on default.html, so all of the scope that you create by including JavaScript files and such is good the entire lifespan of the application and not just while you're on that page. Now let's look at the CSS file. So this is associated with that home.html. In other words, there's a reference at the top of home.html to this home.css. Now let's dissect the left-hand side of this. We've got a style rule on line 1, .homepage section role main. And notice, if you're not too familiar with CSS style rules, the selectors for them, the space is a descendant of. So we're scoping this style rule to anything that's on the home page, okay? So .homepage is a reference to that section that also had the fragment class, and it's a reference to that, and then the space means inside of that home page, look for the section with a property, with an attribute called role with a value of main. So find the main section. And it's gonna, you'll notice that it's gonna locate lines 26 through 28 on the right from the home.html. It's gonna find that main section. And then the CSS style rules or style definitions on lines 2 and 3, the margin left and margin right are then going to be applied to that entire main section. Now, CSS selectors are really cool because you can select not just one thing like we selected one section here, but you can actually select many multiple things. So you could, for instance, select all of the divs on the page or all of the paragraph tags on the page. And you can do so really quickly and tersely with CSS selectors. That's a really exciting area. Now, if you look at lines 6 through 11 and 13 through 18 in the CSS, you'll notice that we're using this funny syntax at media. That's a media query. That means I've got some style rules, but I only want them to apply in certain conditions. In the case of lines 6 through 11, I only want this style rule to apply when the user has snapped the app. So we use the -ms-view state snapped. If the user snaps the app, then suddenly the CSS applies. If the user then switches the app so that it's no longer snapped, then dynamically these CSS style properties no longer apply. They're removed. Likewise, lines 13 through 18, we're defining that in the case of where the user rotates a tablet and they go to full screen portrait, now I want the margin left and right to be 100 pixels. So we're adjusting our margins there depending on how the user is viewing your app. Now, let's take a glance at the JavaScript. So we've got home.html. It has a CSS file and it has a JS file. Every page is made up of the structure, HTML, the style and layout, the CSS, and the logic, which is the JS, and that's what we're looking at now. So there's a reference to this from the HTML file. So home.html has a line that references home.js. And notice how simple the home.js file is. It's pretty short, 10 lines of code so far. This is really just a page definition using the line that you see on line 4, WinJS UI pages define. We're defining the home.html, and that gives us an opportunity to specify a number of properties and essentially override those properties. One of those is the ready property, the ready attribute, which is whose value is a function. This is what needs to happen whenever the page is ready. So this means that whenever the user navigates to home.html, and remember that that was our default page in the page control navigator on default.js, default.html, so the user is going to go to home.html right away. So as soon as they go to this page or navigate to this page, as soon as the document object model, the DOM, is loaded and the page is ready, then this ready function fires. So anything I write in there is then going to run. I do want to point out lines 1 and 10. Notice that we've got this funny function syntax wrapping this entire page. That's called an immediate function, and the reason why that happens is to scope everything inside of this immediate function. Lines 2 through 9 are scoped to occur only within this function. They're not visible in the entire application, so they're not going to step on any other function names or variable names or anything. That's just a common JavaScript pattern for scoping different modules or, in this case, different pages of your application. Okay, so let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio and look at a real live demonstration of this. Here's Visual Studio. I'm going to go to File, New, Project. I'm going to choose JavaScript and Windows Store. If you're running Ultimate or some other professional version of Visual Studio, you're going to notice a lot of different project types, but if you're running Visual Studio Express, you're just going to have Windows Store types. In this case, in either case, we want to find JavaScript and choose Windows Store, and that's where you'll see these 5 different project templates. Now we're going to start with the navigation template. Let's just give it the name of nav template, like that. Okay. Here it's been created, and I want to give you a little glimpse into the project structure here in the Solution Explorer. So in the Solution Explorer, you'll notice that we've got the default.html, and then we also have some JavaScript files under JS and a CS file under CSS. We've got some image assets under images, and then we've got this pages folder. Okay, so just like I showed you before. Now let's take a glance at this default.html, and just like in the slide example, you can see that this is pointing to home.html, and that's under the pages folder. So let's dive into that pages folder, into home, and let's go to the home.html. You can see that this looks just like the example that we were looking at. Now I'm going to change this content. I'm just going to say welcome home, and then I'm going to run this app. Now this is going to run in full screen mode on my computer, and you can see that the welcome home has appeared, so we know that we're editing the right page. And if I want to get out of this now, there are a number of different ways. I could close it, but that's not really necessary. I think the easiest way is to just Alt-Tab back to Visual Studio. Okay, let's go ahead and do one task here just so you can kind of get the concept of this navigation framework. I'm going to create a new folder, call this page 2, and inside that folder let me actually do that a little bit slower so that you can see how I did it. Add a new item. I used the keyboard shortcut. And instead of adding an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file separately, I'm going to add a page control, which is a shortcut to adding all 3 of those assets. Okay, so now on the home page, let's jump into the JavaScript. In the JavaScript, under the ready function, I want to create a button that when the user clicks the button, it navigates them to page 2. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is go to my home.html and declare myself a button. Let's give it an ID of my button, and let's just call it go to page 2. There we go. Now this is called my button. So if I go to my home.js, I can actually just refer to my button, and I can override its onClick function. I'm going to set that to an anonymous function. Now, if you're not familiar with anonymous functions, they're a lot like Lambda functions in C#. An anonymous function is just one that does not have a name, but instead is just anonymous. So whenever the user clicks on that button, now the code that I write on line 9 here is going to run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do WinJS navigation, navigate to, I'm going to navigate to pages, page 2, page2.html. Now I can end it there, but I also have the opportunity here, whenever I do a navigation, to pass in some attributes, some options. And so I create a JavaScript object initializer syntax, and inside there I can put whatever I want. Let's just write 2 parameters, P1 and P2. Okay, so I'm passing those 2 parameters in. And now I'm going to jump over to my page2.js, and notice I've got a little bit more extensive template here, but right here in the ready function, I'm just going to write the word debugger so that we can break right there. I'm going to go ahead and hit F5, run the app. Now I'm on the home page. I'm going to click on Go to Page 2, this button. That event fires and it navigates me to page 2. I land inside the ready method. I'm stopped at the debugger line, and watch this. I can even hover over options. This is what was passed in from that other page, and I can see those values of P1 and P2. Okay, well, there's obviously a whole lot more to JavaScript and HTML application development, but hopefully you've gotten a little taste for this and how it differs from using the .NET suite or the other language stacks for creating Windows web apps. Know that this JavaScript is sitting directly on top of the WinRT API, so we have the full power of the WinRT API. I can dot into the Windows namespaces just like I can from C#. In fact, the naming conventions look very similar to C# until I get, for instance, here's a message box, until I get into the actual method names. And then notice that in JavaScript, the method name has a lowercase s, whereas in C# that would have been an uppercase s. So we get in the characteristics of your language stack of choice, and yet here in JavaScript, I get absolutely full access to that underlying API. So I hope that helps, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the content on learning how to create Windows 8 applications.